You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارشتايجر
pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And it's Soccer Today. Welcome. It's Tuesday. Duane, do you know that it's Cup Final Day today?
I didn't until a few minutes ago, and that might be a little bit telling. I knew and I didn't. There's a lot going on, and Champions League has me distracted and all those sort of things, Kevin. But yeah, the U.S. Open Cup, the oldest knockout cup out there. They like to brag that history up, as they should. But certainly it's a cup that hasn't really got the profile I think a lot of its fans would like in recent years, Kevin.
No, exactly. But it is a cup. It is a trophy being lifted tonight. FC Dallas will be playing DC United tonight for the final, for the trophy, for the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup.
There you go. Exactly. There's lots going on before that, too. And there's some very interesting news here in Canada.
It's a New England Revolution. I don't know why I said DC United. Maybe it's because I had it 2 years ago. But no, the FC Dallas versus New England Revolution tonight.
Yeah, yes, the Revs. Exactly. I was trying to hesitate. I was dancing there, Kevin, to see if I could look that up while you were talking. But, we got it. So we're there. And that's all good. To get back on the segue, though, the segue into what we were going to talk about is the meat. There's a story that was released this morning in The Guardian that has a lot of lips flapping. The one thing I want to say about this real quickly is it's almost like I was reading the last 8 or 9 years of my life written in one Guardian article, but I'm glad that someone's talking about it outside of some geeks like me talking to other geeks, Kevin, finally. But the idea, if you haven't looked at it yet, it says basically that MLS treats Canadians as second-class citizens, which is a harsh thing to say, but basically it lays out all of the stuff that we've talked about for a long time, Kevin and I on this show, and Ben and I on It's Called Football, Ben and I on It's Called Football, I should say, and so on and so forth. And then it puts it out there that how do we have a league where 15% of its teams are Canadian, but only 4% of its players are, and that in 3/4 of the league, the Canadians aren't treated the same as they're treated the same as anyone outside of the United States. They're internationals. How is that right? And what to do about it, Kevin? And I don't know where to even go with it other than to say, it's correct, but what's the solution?
Well, we talked about Canadian as domestics or some form of that happening. Example, 2 or 3 Canadian spots per team or per amount of teams or something. Quotas for Canadian team itself might not be the answer because it might be a detriment. We've seen that experiment with TFC earlier on in their history. But if you're looking at Canadian as domestics, it is a question that I asked Don Garber last week differently because it was asking about Canada as a national team and what MLS can do to help the players. But in itself, it's the exact same question. It's about Canadian players and MLS and how they have a detriment. They have like a hindrance because they're Canadian and they have teams in their own country. So it's that aspect of the question that we talked about for months and for years now on all our shows.
Yeah, look, I mean, a couple of points there. The quota issue, and I have long, people know I'm pro quota and I don't care. I don't care at all whether it impacts the quality of the MLS teams. And that makes me much different than most people because I just don't think it should matter. That this should not be the rule. It is a privilege that the CSA is giving to these 3 companies to be in an American league where they have the opportunity to make a significant amount of money on them. And I don't think it is too much to ask in return for that they include more Canadians in their roster. And that's always been my position. And I know there's a lot of hardcore club before country people out there in this country that just find that attitude that I have. They don't get it. They don't get how anyone could dare suggest that their beloved Reds / Impact / Whitecaps should be forced to be weaker in their mind by playing Canadians. And look, the initial year when TFC started, as you mentioned off there, and if you're new to this discussion, then maybe a little bit of review here is worthwhile. In the initial year of TFC had to have 8 Canadians on its roster. They reduced that in some subsequent years slightly until Vancouver came in. When Vancouver came in, they really pushed hard, largely because they saw what it did for Toronto, I believe, and saw how it impacted their ability to be competitive within Major League Soccer, and it really did. I'll admit that, but there just wasn't it was a two-pronged thing. There wasn't necessarily there was the talent to fill those 8 spots, but the amount of money it would have cost to get the talent to fill those 8 spots, because they then were prime spots that they knew that they had them over a barrel, right? The players. So there was kind of that aspect coming in too, that TFC not only had to find 8 Canadians, but it had to overpay 8 Canadians because their spots were prime. Anyway, so Vancouver at that point forced it down to 3, and there's only been 9 dedicated spots for Canadians in the league since that point, 3 per team. Obviously, some other players can find their way onto rosters. There's 24 players that are Canadian in Major League Soccer right now, which is increasing each year a little bit. But if you opened the floodgates and allowed the graduates of those 3 Canadian teams, and this is one thing that was in the article, Kevin, that I found interesting, a possible solution might be to give a waiver to Canadians that came through Major League Soccer academies. So therefore, they were trained within MLS. You could change the rules so they're homegrown focused rather than nationality focused.
So homegrown would be domestics, just regardless of Canadian or American, or maybe even international for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. And you change that league wide, and you're no longer talking about any sort of potential problem with the immigration laws or the employment laws down there, because basically you're not making them different. You're saying that anyone who's a homegrown within the league is considered to be a homegrown status, not an international status. You're doing away with the international rule altogether. What that would mean in effect is you could sign an unlimited amount of internationals without worrying about quotas there, regardless of where they came from, but that you would be giving specific status to homegrowns, which would be, so many per team would be forced, right?
And I figured, Duane, that there's going to be as well a timetable. Well, you have to play at least 3 years for the academy to be considered a homegrown from that academy as well, because otherwise it'll be easy. We sign Lionel Messi to the academy for 1 year, and then he can play for the club. You know what I mean? MLS being MLS, GMs will find loopholes to try to sign more international that way if you do that rule. But that's why you probably need a timetable of 3 years in the academy, become a homegrown, and then doesn't matter if you're Canadian, Peruvian, or American, you'll be considered homegrown in MLS, and you'll be considered domestic. That's what would make sense, right? So, yeah.
Yes, sorry, I had a bit of a blip there. I didn't actually hear you finish that thought, but
I was just saying that you need probably a timetable of 3 years or something in the academy, so GMs don't take advantage of the loophole to sign more international than they're supposed to, but to actually sign homegrown as domestics. Doesn't matter if they're Canadian, Peruvian, or American.
Yeah, well, sure, I could see maybe some provisions that way. I'm not quite as worried about the loopholes that much. I think that they probably would. Even someone that was a year, or you could just even make it a rule within the academies that there's rules on sort of what you can do anyway in terms of recruiting players under the age of 18 by FIFA. So that would restrict it a certain amount to there. You could just also say that an academy player has to play in your academy before the age of 18 or before the age of 20 or something like that, which would then be based on the FIFA rules, which would limit movement that's not legitimate, as we've seen with Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid getting slapped in the wrist, or Barcelona previously for recruiting minors, is essentially what they're getting suspended for, right? For transfers. The same thing would apply. The same rules would apply in North America. So if you had some kind of rule in which you had to be in your academy before a certain age because of the international laws that already exist, I think you would have some protection to stop complete poaching from happening out there. But I do think that if you're looking at this as a solution to the Canadians as domestics, that you do. It benefits the American teams too, because most people that are are proponents to MLS doing more for the American player right now would be focused almost entirely on the opportunities that young Americans have. And if you force MLS teams to play X amount of academy grads, X amount of homegrown players each year, and they can trade those spots just like internationals right now. So that there would be certain ways around it if you wanted to be more international focused. If that were the case, I think that would ultimately benefit the American player as well, because you'd be getting more opportunity for more young U.S. players. It would just include the Canadian players in that mix. And I think that ultimately a rule like that might even benefit the American player more than the Canadian player, but it would benefit the Canadian player much more than it is right now. And that's kind of the point I'm getting at with that, Kevin.
No, but it's interesting to keep an eye on it. And if we go back to Don Garber's word last Wednesday, he mentioned that we might be expecting some announcement on what Vic and Peter on the Canadian Soccer Association side are working on before the end of the year. So we'll keep our ears to the ground to make sure that we can report what's been talking about.
Obviously, yeah. A couple more things quick out of that before we move away from it. One thing that was a bit disturbing to me was the fact that in the article, Victor had told the reporter that he hopes to have a Canadian league up and running within 5 years, which is a much longer time frame than I'm particularly comfortable with. And I'm hoping that might have been him being conservative with that reporter who doesn't necessarily know all these issues. It was a very good survey article, but it was clear that it was someone that was learning these things, right? So maybe that was him being conservative. But the one thing that I did want to touch on is the first time I've ever seen this is that Victor put out the prospect of pulling his support for the Major League Soccer teams, that's saying that he wouldn't allow them to play in Major League Soccer. And that's a very harsh, heavy stick approach that I have not heard the CSA use before in a public forum. I've heard people, kind of whisper behind that this was an option, but the nuclear option, so to speak, which I don't think anyone wants, is ultimately, I think, what might get MLS's attention. And that's unfortunate that you have to go nuclear to get people's attention. All right, fine. You're not going to do this for us. You're not going to find a solution. I'm going to pull the support. And those three teams are up the creek right then as that happens, because you may not agree with it out there, fan that's listening, but the reality is the CSA, by virtue of the way world football works, has every right to do that. They have to give permission to play over the border, and if they don't, they can't. So you may not like that. You may think it's the wrong move, but it is in the CSA's back pocket, and it seems like it might be part of the negotiation tactic right now to try and get that change, which is desperately needed. And we've been saying it for 5, 6, 7 years now, and it's very frustrating when you're up here doing that, but it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly, Duane. All right, so anything else on that subject?
Well, I mean, it's the same topic we've been talking about for years.
It's hard for us to find an endpoint to this because, the Premier League is the ultimate answer to that question. The Canadian Premier League is, the having our own league. We're now going to be considered second-class citizen, might be the ultimate solution to that problem.
It is, and the problem, and this is the other angle. I do have one more angle that I could do. They talk about how MLS is helping Canadian soccer, how it might be hindering Canadian soccer. One area that we don't talk a lot about is on the business side of things, because it's very clear on the business side of things in the 3 markets that it exists. It is very good for those Canadians that are involved at that level, right? It is producing some jobs for some executives here, although you look at who's running a lot of these teams outside of Montreal, where they have a very Canadian focus there. There's a lot of outside influences coming up in the governance and the running of the teams. The coaches outside of Biello are not Canadian, so it's not necessarily helping greatly there, but it is providing fans certainly with teams to cheer for, which is something we didn't have 10 years ago, and that is a benefit. But what it also does, Kevin, and this is one thing that we see all the time when we hear Canadians talk about the Canadian Premier League, Canadians that aren't entirely in support of it, is that they're worried about losing their team in this American league that they're comfortable in. And ultimately that undermines efforts to create what we need. So in that regard, MLS can be argued, and I understand there's a lot of nuance to this, but on the extreme end, you can argue that MLS is actually hindering the growth of the sport here because it is preventing fans in this country from getting behind the idea that we all, if we break it down logically, know is exactly what is needed, and that is to provide a league that is for us, controlled by us, and that gives our players the most opportunities. So we want this hybrid model. Most of us that talk about it, we want the Welsh model, as I like to call it. But we also need fans and executives and business people, especially potential sponsors, to understand that they need to support both if they want both to continue, and that they can't continue to put all of their eggs into the American basket. This isn't the bash on the Americans, but it's just a reality. We're 10 years into this thing. Are we any better? Are we any closer to qualifying, Kevin?
No, we are not.
All right.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with Obi-Wan back and forward.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And Duane, we've talked about this issue a couple of times, but Avi Wambach has released, well, book is upcoming. Next week or the week after is coming out. It's called Forward, and some quite big revelations in that book.
Yeah, certainly it was reported in Rochester yesterday with a reporter that she's comfortable with, I'm sure, that part of the book is going to contain some pretty juicy details. And this is pretty par for the course when you're releasing a book that's you're trying to sell the book too. So you want to tease people on the revelations that are in it so that it's worth picking up. So if you look at it from a purely cynical view, which you can, it's significant that the timing is now that she's coming through with these things. But basically, the big part, there's two parts that are going to get people talking. One, I don't care about because it's her personal life, and I don't really, I feel for her on a personal level for the fact that she's going through a divorce right now. But that's neither here nor there on a soccer show. That's someone's personal life, and I don't, it doesn't have much relevance to this. But what does have relevance is the admittance that she had a pill problem and a booze problem. The pill problem, especially over several years when she was a player, where she abused prescription drugs and alcohol while she was with the U.S. national team player. And first off, let's just put it out there, Kevin, that obviously we are human beings, and Abby Wambach was a player that we have made fun of in the past in this show, because we're Canadian, we play into that rivalry narrative and all that sort of stuff, but she's a human being, and we as human beings want her to tackle any demons that she has. We do not wish her ill health. We do not wish her to have addiction issues. That is clear as anything. But Kevin, there is another side of that.
Exactly. Well, first of all, addiction is a disease, so there's that aspect to it. Once that being said, she said she had abuse of pills, and then she mentioned the pills themselves. There's Vicodin included, but the one that stood out to me is Adderall. Yeah. Adderall is a pill that has helped with some adults, kids with ADHD, with focus issues. What it does, it brings focus. It's kind of like it's a derivative of a speed. It's a derivative of the methamphetamine, but it's designed to help you focus, to help you get things done, to have a clarity of mind, to anticipate things. It is a performance-enhancing drug in certain things in society. If you are a chess player, you are tested for Adderall and beta blockers, but Adderall is prohibited, and it's prohibited on many lists, and it is prohibited on the WADA list. So how come that never rose up?
Yeah. Well, and Adderall is also can be used as a masking agent for other drugs as
well. Yes, but just as an example, you want to use it on soccer is called a cerebral game sometimes. It does have a mental focus, vision aspect to it, and Adderall is an enhancement of those aspects of your body. So in a way, it is a performance-enhancing drug.
No, for sure. And it's the drug that jumped out at me too, as well, because I know that it is a common drug. And I know there's a big story here that goes beyond
students
soccer.
take this, Duane, in medical school and things like this to keep up with the pressures of having to perform all the time.
Sure, it's an academic enhancer for sure. Also, it's a drug that if you look at in the NFL or something like that, it's like there's a stat out there that the population at large has like 5% of the people have ADHD or 10%, whatever the number is, but that it's like 35% of NFL football players have been prescribed Adderall by their doctors. So I suspect
It's like the new Meldonium.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're probably having prescriptions for it. And it is a complicated issue in terms of catching it if they have a prescription, because there are waivers within WADA for legitimate usages of medications, right? So there is some complications there. But it's exactly what jumped out at me. What we're saying is, how did she avoid being detected for years on this? And
Well,
this
it goes back to where they play professionally, the NWSL, or before the other leagues, the lack of organization or support financially to have an anti-doping program or policy or partners that can do it for you. USADA, WADA, whatever the case may be, those are the two biggest instances in the world of sports in North America right now. So the fact that they were never involved, they do respect the same list at a smaller level, but the fact that it's a different level playing field, talk about women's soccer over the last 15 years, it wasn't the same as the UFC right now, which we've seen a lot of people getting caught because USADA has used his entire power and is the one managing that part of that sport. And that's where you see a lot of Adderalls. You see a lot of substances like this one of getting popped for. But we'll go back to soccer, even MLS, there's policies, but in writing, it says players can be tested or not, or maybe, or what ifs. It's written in a way, even go back to the latest CBA of a few years ago, you do have in writing that there's a possibility of it, and there's a substance list that is not as extensive as WADA. It is not the same. It is a certain one with the possibility for MLS to add or subtract substances, but it brings the question up of, is there a stringent enough policy or testing? Because it's all well and good having that policy, but if between you and me, we all know that there's not the testing at the same level as other sport that we're used to this day, the fact that it's 2016, another sport like cycling, which basically everybody gets tested every day almost. So you know that there's a certain levels to it, but we know it's not up to par in professional sports in North America, and I would include MLS in that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there's an ethical question at play here in terms of whether these leagues take care of their players' health when it relates to this. And this is ultimately, I want to stress, this isn't a like, oh, gotcha, Abby kind of thing that we're talking about here. I'm concerned about how this woman didn't get nailed so that she got help, because this is not a case of her. I don't believe, like, the Adderall can be taken recreationally too. Like, you can, if you take enough of it, it gives you a buzz, basically. Yes. I mean, it's like speed. So, it sounds like maybe that's how she was taking it. And that's not necessarily performance enhancing, but it certainly is health restricting, to put it that way. And if you have proper testing out there, you can get help for these players quickly. And that should really be the concern of the players' associations and of the leagues that they play in. There is a cost prohibitive aspect to this as well. It is not cheap to test athletes consistently. It is one of the reasons why the biggest abuse of performance-enhancing drugs is likely in the high school level around the world, even as players try and get up to a certain level, to get up to a professional level where they have the most opportunity to close their income gap that may exist for them, right? Get that pro contract is the goal. And once you get there, maybe you drop off because you've already won the lottery, so to speak. So there's just a lot of questions about this. And obviously, if she's smart enough to have had this from a lot of people, although certainly people in her life knew about this based on the excerpts of the book that we've seen so far. But nonetheless, she's hid it from the public pretty well. If she's smart enough to do that, she was probably smart enough to not abuse before Olympics, which is when she was most likely to be caught, right? But there's just it suggests to me that someone out there should have been doing more to make sure that this stuff came to the surface so that she got the help. If she's telling the truth and that it was her DUI, which we talked about on this show a few months ago, her DUI that embarrassed her into getting the help she needed, and she says she's clean now, and we hope that she is. If that's the case, then obviously a positive test would have done the same thing. If that is ultimately what drove her to a healthier choice, then that's better for everyone. And it's not always just about the scoreboard in this aspect. And that's where I come from. And that's where what I see when I talk about this story is that why didn't we help her earlier? Why weren't there provisions in place to catch this? And I get that it's complicated when they're prescription, but certainly how much a prescription drug is supposed to be in the system. And if you've exceeded the levels within the blood test, then you're not using it the way it's supposed to be used. And that's a problem too. And even if it's done quietly, I don't care if it's done quietly, just get them into a program. And if that happens, then great. Because it's ultimately the health of these people that is most concerning to me, not necessarily the performance enhancing aspect when it's about abuse.
But for me, I saw the flag. I saw the famous red flag. If you listen to Five Rings, you heard me talk about doping for a long time. It is one of my battles that I like to keep an eye on because I do believe in fairness in sports. And in a way, not saying that you can eradicate doping because human will you be human, and we've been taking advantage of situation for thousands of years. So that's not going to change, but you need to put controls in place. And that's why I believe an anti-doping policy, a more stringent one, or at least better testing could have maybe helped that situation, or it can maybe help the situation of any MLS players or soccer players in North America going forward. We've seen players drop dead on the pitch, not here, but we've seen it around the world because of those type of situation. Sometimes it's because of a medical situation of heartbeat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But sometimes there were because of methamphetamine taken before games. So, there's that aspect to it too, that safety for me is closely related to keeping an eye on it. And so that is interesting case. And then it raised a red flag, and I started reading on the MLS doping policy and all that. And I need to get more details and more confirmation. I sent a few emails. But, it is a subject that we need to take maybe a closer look in this day and age where we see a lot of change in physiques, in body types over the last few years in different sports for the better, but we need to continue that trend.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to hear more about us talking about doping, we've pretty exhaustively talked about it over the past 6 months or so on the Five Rings podcast, our Olympics show, obviously with the Russian scandal and all of that. We really had this topic done. We've done a lot on this topic. So if you're interested in that, if this has piqued your interest, for sure, look back in the archives of Five Rings. But I think, Kevin, probably at that time we have a couple more items we want to get to today. So let's maybe move on and wish Abby well on her personal health.
Exactly. But you know what is today as well, Duane?
What's that?
It is.
We're waiting for it.
Yes. Sorry if I destroyed your ears, people. But it is Champions League day today. Group stage starts today.
Yeah, a lot of games today. I'm really only focused on one, to be honest with you right now. But yeah, certainly there are a lot of interesting matchups to go through here. The one I'm talking about, of course,
you're talking about FC Basel and Ludogorets, right? Because Canadian players involved in Ludogorets. That's what you're talking about.
Backup keeper, yeah. Boyan, who was the half player and the 1.5 international quality players that was meant to be. So that's good. It's also Atiba Hutchinson will be in action today against Benfica, which is a pretty marquee matchup that we should be able to see on TV. So it'd be good for Canadians to see a player like Atiba on their television when he's not playing for the Canadian national team. And you can really understand how important he is to his club team, the Stikas. So that's a good matchup there too. Quick. I was talking though about Borussia Mönchengladbach's game today, which they're playing a team from England, some northern team. Sky Blue. City, Manchester City.
Yeah. Against the Gladbach. Bayern Munich, FC Rostov, Barcelona, Celtic, Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal, PSV Eindhoven, Atletico Madrid, Dynamo Kiev, Napoli, Benfica, and Besiktas are the rest of the games for today.
Yeah, the game. What game, Joe? Like, obviously, I'm going to be watching Manchester City and Mönchengladbach, which I think, for many reasons, is that group is a killer group, as we all know. But so this is a very key game, and that probably, I think, bias aside, is the most compelling game of the day. But outside of that game, Kevin, any of these jump out at you that you're interested in?
Paris Arsenal. For Paris, it's the new Paris Saint-Germain, the new coach with Atem Ben Arfa not even included in the lineup for this game today due to work ethic at practice. And you have Arsenal with their perennial get a couple players in the offseason will be enough to finish higher than fourth. Well, they did last year. They almost won the damn thing. But they were close because of the late push. So in the Champions League this time, can they get good result? And in that group, those are the top two teams. And it's a great battle to start off the Champions League. Paris Saint-Germain with their new club, no Zlatan, and no other key pieces that were moved away. New coach, Unai Emery. So versus Arsenal, that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, from a train wreck perspective, I'm curious to see how Celtic coming off that huge 5-1. We can talk about the first Old Firm derby of the new era. I'm going to be very careful how I say this.
Yes, Rangers are back, and that's why they have the derby.
Yeah. So the first one since they got back from their little walk in the wilderness there, that was a 5-1 win for Celtic. Pardon me, for Rangers. No,
whoa, Dwayne. Okay, people, don't throw your phones. Just a it's free doing slide. It's Celtic won. Okay,
Celtic won. They're pretty solid now, but they're coming off that, so they're riding high. But they may get slapped back down to earth because that game with Barca today is certainly one that is going to it's good for the fans up there to see that, but certainly not exactly what you want to build momentum off of. But we'll see how that goes. That's certainly an interesting game. I mentioned Besiktas and Benfica, which is has the Canadian content in there. That has me interested as well. Ludogorets Basel is probably a great Europa League matchup that's in the Champions League, but certainly those are two teams that have had some limited success in recent years. Ludogorets has been a dominant team in their country. They have the Canadian content, backup keeper there. Basel's had slayed some dragons in this competition, so they're of note. And obviously, Munich starts its competition too with the Russian side. But
one thing I don't want to forget, Duane, as well. It's not just UEFA Champions League. It is a CONCACAF Champions League too today.
The real Champions League, Champions League, the CCL.
Look at that very exotic matchup we have tonight at 8 p.m. in Kansas City. Sporting Kansas City versus the Vancouver Whitecaps. No, Vancouver Whitecaps. No, nothing exotic here.
Vancouver.
Vancouver Whitecaps. Real Estelí versus Suchitepeques. So that one's actually pretty exotic. And my favorite team of this tournament so far, Police United versus Pachuca tonight.
Yeah, Police United. There's a couple of Police Uniteds out there, but yeah, that's very CONCACAF of that. No, the Whitecaps, it's a big one for them, for our Canadian listeners out there, obviously, that are interested in that. The Whitecaps seem to be taking this competition a little more seriously. If they can get the win tonight, I think that will all but assure that they'll be playing in the spring, and that'll be good for them. They're following the mode of
the Impact.
Toronto and the Impact.
They got the third one to make it there, but why not? If your season is not unfolds the way you want, why not put your egg in the CONCACAF Champions League basket and get a couple of good crowds at the BC Place in the spring?
Well, and you know what? To be serious right now, it's a big one for them tonight. If they win this game, I think that they're probably going to be through, and they can almost assuredly through if they win tonight, and that would allow them then to sort of have both. They could then focus entirely on the playoff race as such as it is. I think they're done, but they you never know. If they win out, they could. So they don't have to really balance if they win tonight. So this is a key game for them to get that result. And obviously, I know from firsthand experience, and I saw it in Montreal too. I was at the final. So I saw the excitement in the city for around that. And I was here in the semifinal and the quarterfinal in Toronto when they had it. I understand how that can really erase a lot of frustrations from bad seasons, particularly in Toronto's case, where they were having an historically bad start to the season. They were also on the CCL run, which gave a distraction and was really key for the fan base. And I think, in many ways, it was more than a Band-Aid. It was, it stopped the bleeding, right? Like, it could have been really damaging if there was nothing else to play for in Toronto's season there. So that is something that benefits the Whitecaps to get the result, to allow them to point to that and to retain some of those fans that may have walked away otherwise out of frustration because it doesn't look like they're going to make the playoffs this year. So it is a big matchup. And I think, Kevin, on that note, we should maybe put our focus once more on that cup competition that we talked about off the top. And,
tonight, we have FC Dallas versus the New England Revolution in the final of the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup, the longest running cup trophy in North America. I think it's even more in North America, Duane.
Yeah, it's
like more over than 100 years old.
It's a lot of history to it. And, I think that...
How old is the FA Cup? I think it's like something like 100 years old as well, right?
Unfortunately, I don't have my computer in front of me to look that up. But yeah, it's certainly, they're both very old. They're amongst the two. Now, the U.S. Open Cup is the poor cousin, though. There's no doubt about that. Part of that has to do with how the MLS teams treat it. They do kind of go in half-cocked for the most part in the early parts of the competition and see how it goes. And that's no different really than what happens in England, where especially in the League Cup, if you look at that, where they'll see what happens for the first few weeks. And then if they get to the the League Cup's case, it's if they get to the semifinal stage, they start trying. In the FA Cup, it's more like they get to the 5th round and they might start to really focus on it because it might give them an opportunity.
Yeah.
Whereas in MLS, same deal though. You get to the semifinal stage, you start to play. So for Dallas's case though, and I think this is the talking point for the most part that most people are focused on, is because Dallas right now is leading the Supporters Shield race. They're in the Lamar U.S. Open Cup final. Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup final. That's a mouthful. Anyway,
yep.
So it gives them the opportunity to have, quote, unquote, a double, and potentially, if you win the MLS Cup, then to get a historic treble. It's never happened within Major League Soccer to have all three at the same time. So a lot of people are talking about that. Does beg the question, and maybe we'll end with this. We'll get our predictions on who we think is going to win tonight when at the very end. But one quick thought exercise. A lot of people are focused on the fact that Dallas has a chance to make an historic double and perhaps triple this year, but no one is talking about the other team.
The Revs.
No, the other team that has a chance to do a double.
Oh,
because they're already holding the cup.
TFC.
And they're in second place in that thing.
Well, they could actually get a treble if they get lucky too. If they get a couple of results here, the Montreal guy here saying that Toronto could do a treble if they win the Supporters Shield and the MLS Cup, but that's a big task.
I know, and the talking point. A lot of Americans will look down their nose at that because they don't view the Voyageurs Cup at the same level as the U.S. Open Cup. And I ask you to objectively look at how hard it is to win both, and argue with me that it's more difficult to win the U.S. Open Cup.
7 games. Talk about 1 game difference here.
1 game difference, and as I just said earlier on in that competition, you're either getting a team that's much lower than you in level, or you're playing against reserve players. So I think that the competitions, the cups are pretty equal to win, so that if Toronto were to win a double or a treble this year, that they also should get some credit for that. And I am coming from Toronto when I say that, but I guarantee you, as we talked about also in this show, that they won't be viewed as a treble winner if that happens. Because
no, exactly.
They won't be.
The U.S. Open Cup started in 1913, Duane, and the FA Cup started in 1871. So the FA Cup is still older than the cup, and that's not going to change.
Second oldest consecutive. I believe it is the second oldest consecutively run cup is what the stat is. Yeah. All right. Predictions on that result today. Who wins the first American trophy of the year? Kevin?
FC Dallas with homegrowns on the pitch. Everybody's dream. You win a trophy for a team that used to be owned, if not still to this day, by the Hunt family, if I'm not mistaken, as FC Dallas. It would be fun to win a trophy with their name on it.
All right, fair enough. I believe that whatever you expect is going to happen in the U.S. Open Cup often does not. And so I am going to pick the New England Revolution to pull the upset tonight. And otherwise, we talked about it with Vancouver a minute ago. Sometimes, like DC United a few years ago, when your leagues are going very well, you can put all of your eggs in one basket and allow yourself the opportunity to win something that you can point to and then have some fun times with your fans. Philadelphia never got the job done in the final. They lost a couple times, so they weren't quite able to replicate what I'm saying, but I think that the Revs will get the job done tonight and then completely crash the rest of the season and not make the playoffs. So that is my prediction. So we have 1 for Dallas and 1 for the Revs, and that's all we're going to be able to do today, Kevin, because we do have some technical issues that we're working on, and if you want to help us with that, you can always give us our Patreon. What's that Patreon address, Kevin? We haven't given it in a while.
patreon.com/sports podcasting network. You can help us, and that way we'll have our studio back up and running.
Yep, exactly. By Thursday, we'll have my normal setup up here. We're not going to get into the details, but I'm working on something here that's an unfortunate situation, but we're getting the show out to you using my phone and other things like that. So on that note,
tomorrow,
give that Patreon a look. And otherwise, Kevin, as always, say goodbye.
Tomorrow, 11 a.m. for Soccer Today. We'll be talking about the Champions League game of today, setting up tomorrow. We'll talk about MLS and whatever's going on in the world of football with the soccer perspective. Until tomorrow, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.